Of all the stories I've told myself, the one about the summer of 1998 was my favorite. It was a simple, sturdy narrative that I had polished to a high sheen over 25 years, a foundational myth for the person I believed myself to be. In it, I was the hero. I was the one who stood for what was right. I was the girl who chose honesty when it was hard. The story had a clear villain and a clear lesson, and it had served me well. Until today. The screen in front of me held the truth, posted casually on a social media feed I scrolled through with my morning coffee. It was a tribute, one of those heartfelt eulogies for a lost parent that have become a common currency of public grief. The woman who wrote it was named Jessica, and I had a vague recollection of her, a younger girl who was always on the periphery of our neighborhood pack. Her post was for her father. She wrote about what a wonderful man he was, how he'd held their family together through an impossibly difficult year. That year was 1998, the year he had lost his job. She wrote about her 13th birthday, a milestone that had fallen during that period of financial strain. There was no money for presents, she explained, but her older brother had been determined to get her the one thing she wanted more than anything. It was a collectible toy, a specific one she had obsessed over all summer. A Stardust, the unicorn, beanie baby from Henderson's Market. Her brother's name was Michael. The words rearranged themselves in my head, dislodging a cornerstone of my identity with a sickening jolt. A story I had carried for a quarter of a century, a narrative of my own youthful integrity, collapsed into dust. For 25 years, Michael was the boy who stole. He was the thief I had bravely exposed, the object lesson in a childhood morality play. My action, telling Mr. Henderson what I had seen, was the righteous choice, the difficult but necessary thing. It was a defining moment, one of the first times I understood that doing the right thing often comes at a personal cost. I had sacrificed a budding friendship, a summer crush, for the sake of principle. That was the story. But this new information, this heartbreaking, context-altering piece of a puzzle I never knew was incomplete, presented a different narrative entirely. One where a desperate brother was trying to give his little sister a moment of happiness in the middle of his family's private crisis. And I, the hero of my own story, was just a clueless kid who got in the way. The sudden reframing was dizzying. The black and white photograph of my memory was flooded with shades of gray I had never imagined existed. The certainty I had held onto for so long felt like a betrayal, not of Michael, but of myself. To understand the weight of this, the sheer tectonic shift in my personal history, you have to understand that summer. You have to understand what it was to be 12 years old in a world that felt both infinitely large and intimately small. For over 2 decades, I believed I knew exactly what happened at Henderson's Market. But I only knew my part of the story, a single, self-serving chapter. To understand the rest, you have to go back to a time before the internet was in every home, when freedom was a full set of gears and the end of the world was the edge of town. The first day of summer vacation in 1998 arrived not with a bang, but with the profound, expansive quiet of a morning with no agenda. The tyranny of the alarm clock was over. The rigid structure of the school day dissolved, leaving behind a formless, beautiful expanse of time. Our parents, products of a different generation, operated on a simple principle: be home when the streetlights come on. The hours between breakfast and dusk were ours to fill as we saw fit. There were no scheduled playdates, no enrichment camps, no digital tethers. Our world was analog, and our freedom was absolute. A day could be anything. It could be an expedition to the creek at the far end of the neighborhood, a project to build a ramp for our bikes, or simply hours spent lying in the grass, debating the important topics of the day. We were a tribe of neighborhood kids, operating under our own set of rules, our movements dictated by whim and the slow passage of the sun. This lack of structure wasn't neglect. It was a form of trust. We were expected to navigate our own small conflicts, to invent our own entertainment, and to learn the geography of our world one street at a time. It was a world of benign neglect that fostered a fierce independence we didn't even have the words to appreciate at the time. My Huffy was more than a bicycle. It was a vessel of pure potential. It was the key that unlocked the neighborhood, transforming a collection of streets and cul-de-sacs into a kingdom. With it, I could cover distances that felt monumental, expanding my world from my own front yard to the farthest edges of our suburban map. It was my transportation, my escape pod, my partner in every adventure. Every morning, the first order of business was to meet Emily. Our friendship was the central pillar of my summer. We didn't need to make plans. The plan was always the same. We would get on our bikes and just go. We'd pedal down familiar sidewalks, our roots weaving a complex, invisible tapestry over the landscape of our town. Sometimes our journey had a vague destination, the park, the school playground, but mostly, the journey was the point. We rode until we found something, or someone, interesting. Our conversations flowed as easily as our wheels turned, a constant stream of observations, jokes, and confessions that formed the soundtrack to our days. Our bikes were an extension of ourselves, the tools that gave us the autonomy our parents' generation had found in their first cars. They were the engines of our freedom. At the geographic and social center of our universe was Henderson's Market. It wasn't a supermarket or a chain. It was a corner store in the truest sense, a small brick building that seemed to have existed forever. Mr. Henderson was as much a fixture as the store itself. He was an older man who seemed to know every family in the neighborhood. He presided over his domain with a quiet, steady presence, a gatekeeper to the small joys of childhood. The layout of the store was etched into my mind. You entered into a main aisle that led straight to the counter. To the left was the long, refrigerated case of sodas and juices. To the right was the aisle that mattered most, the one lined with every kind of candy and snack imaginable. It was a library of childhood currency. But the store's most prized treasures were kept in a glass display case, right on the main counter, next to the register. This was where Mr. Henderson kept the special items, the things that required careful consideration and saved up allowance money. It held baseball cards, yo-yos with special features, and, for the duration of that summer, the most coveted items of all, a rotating collection of Beanie Babies. Henderson's was our clubhouse, our bank, our news hub, and our destination. It was the place we always ended up. Michael was a year older than us, which in the rigid hierarchy of youth placed him in a different stratosphere. He and his friends often occupied the curb outside Henderson's. Their bikes leaned against the brick wall, creating an informal gauntlet you had to pass through to enter the store. They had an air of casual confidence that we younger kids lacked. They weren't bullies, not in the traditional sense. They didn't go out of their way to bother anyone, but their presence was a constant reminder of the social ladder. Michael, however, was different. While his friends were louder, more performative in their adolescent coolness, he possessed a quieter sort of self-assurance. He had a way of observing things, of taking in the scene without feeling the need to dominate it. There was an intelligence in his posture, a sense that he was processing the world on a different level. He didn't just occupy space, he inhabited it with a purpose that I found inexplicably compelling. He stood out not because he was the loudest or the toughest, but because he seemed the most real. Our friendship didn't begin with a formal introduction. It grew organically in the shared space of Henderson's Market. It started with small acknowledgments, a nod as I passed him on my way into the store, a brief exchange while waiting for Mr. Henderson to count out change. Then, the interactions began to lengthen. One afternoon, he saw me struggling to master a simple bike trick, a curb jump that my friends and I had been trying to perfect for weeks. He didn't mock my clumsy attempts. Instead, he walked over, took a moment to explain the mechanics of shifting my weight, and demonstrated it with an effortless grace. He made it look simple, and with his instruction, I finally managed it. Another time, Emily had already gone home, and I found myself sitting on the same curb his group usually claimed, finishing a soda. He came out of the store, and instead of joining his friends who were already heading off, he sat down a few feet away. We didn't say much at first, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. We just existed in the same space, watching the cars go by, two kids with nowhere else to be. These moments, small and seemingly insignificant, began to accumulate, building a bridge between his world and mine. The conversation that cemented everything happened on one of those long, warm afternoons. We were on the curb again, a familiar setting that was becoming our spot. The talk drifted from the usual subjects, bikes, teachers, who had the best collection of pogs, to things that felt more substantial. He asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, a question no one had ever posed with genuine curiosity. I told him I wanted to be a writer, to tell stories. He didn't laugh or make a joke. He just nodded, as if that were the most reasonable thing in the world. He then spoke about his own aspirations, not with the bravado of his friends, but with a quiet sincerity. He talked about his family, about the responsibility he felt as the older brother. He didn't complain, he just stated it as a fact of his life. In that conversation, I felt a shift. It was more than just a crush on an older boy. It was a feeling of being recognized, of my own internal world being acknowledged by someone I admired. He wasn't just the cool, confident boy from the curb anymore. He was Michael, a person with his own thoughts and worries, and for a brief, significant moment, he had let me see them. The arrival of a new shipment of Beanie Babies at Henderson's was a major event. Word would spread through the neighborhood with the speed of a wildfire, and a pilgrimage of kids on bikes would descend upon the store. On a Tuesday in late July, the most anticipated delivery of the summer arrived. Among the new assortment of colorful, pellet-filled creatures was the one everyone had been talking about, the one featured in all the collectors' magazines, Stardust the Unicorn. It was considered one of the rare ones. Mr. Henderson, knowing its value, placed it in the position of honor inside the glass display case on the counter. It became an instant object of obsession. Kids would press up against the glass, their conversations dominated by strategies for acquiring it. It required a significant amount of allowance money, more than any of us usually had on hand. The unicorn became a symbol of status, a tangible representation of ultimate victory in the summer's ongoing contest of collecting. Its presence in the store elevated the daily trip to Henderson's from a casual stop to a necessary check-in, just to make sure it was still there, waiting. The disappearance happened on a Thursday afternoon. The store was filled with the usual post-lunch crowd of kids. I was in the candy aisle with Emily, debating the merits of various sour candies, when we heard Mr. Henderson's voice. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the low hum of conversation. He was standing behind the counter, looking at the empty spot in the glass case. The unicorn was gone. His expression wasn't one of anger, which would have been frightening but understandable. It was one of deep, genuine disappointment, and that was somehow worse. It felt like we had all let him down personally. He looked around at the dozen or so of us, scattered throughout the aisles. He asked if anyone had seen anything, if anyone knew what had happened to it. A chorus of denials filled the space. Everyone was a suspect, and the easy camaraderie of the store evaporated, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. The trust that had always been an unspoken rule of Henderson's market had been broken. The store, our sanctuary, suddenly felt like a crime scene. As the denials echoed through the store, my attention was drawn to Michael. He had been near the counter just moments before, talking to one of his friends. Now, he was standing by the door, his back mostly to the room. While everyone else was professing their innocence and speculating about what could have happened, he was completely silent. He seemed to be trying to make himself smaller, to fade into the background. I tried to catch his eye, to exchange a look of shared disbelief, but he wouldn't look in my direction. He kept his gaze fixed on the door, his posture rigid. Then, without a word to anyone, he pushed the door open and left. His abrupt departure felt strange. It wasn't his usual confident stride, it was a hasty retreat. A small, unwelcome thought began to form in my mind. It was a flicker of suspicion, a question I didn't want to ask but couldn't ignore. Why would he leave like that? Why wouldn't he look at anyone? The easy connection we had built over the past few weeks suddenly felt fragile, threatened by this new, unsettling possibility. A few days passed. The mystery of the missing unicorn was the only topic of conversation. Theories were floated, and a general air of suspicion hung over our daily gatherings at the store. Then, I saw him. I had taken a different route home from Emily's house, cutting through the edge of the park. There was a secluded area there, a small clearing behind a thick cluster of old pine trees that we rarely visited. Michael was there, by himself. He was sitting on a fallen log, his back to the path. He was holding something. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I stopped, shielded by the trees, my heart starting to beat faster. He turned the object over in his hands, and then I saw it. There was no mistaking it. It was the unicorn. The proof was undeniable. My initial flicker of suspicion ignited into a certainty that felt heavy and unpleasant. Seeing him with it, alone and in secret, confirmed the worst. The image of him holding the stolen item burned itself into my memory. The boy who had talked to me about his dreams, who had taught me a bike trick, was a thief. The disappointment was a sharp physical sensation. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. This wasn't a simple case of someone breaking a rule. This was Michael. This was the person I had spent weeks admiring, the one whose approval had started to feel important. I rode my bike straight to Emily's house, my legs pumping with a frantic energy. I found her in her backyard, and the whole story came tumbling out of me. Mr. Henderson's disappointment, Michael's strange behavior, and finally, what I had just witnessed in the park. Emily was my moral compass, her sense of the world much more straightforward than my own. For her, the situation was simple. Stealing was wrong. Mr. Henderson was a nice man who had been wronged. Michael had done a bad thing. Her reaction was devoid of the emotional complexity that was tying me in knots. She listened, and when I was done, she just looked at me and said, "Well, you have to tell Mr. Henderson. It's the right thing to do." Hearing her say it, so plainly and with such conviction, solidified the decision that had been forming in my own mind. It cut through my confusion and my disappointment in Michael. She was right. It was the only right thing to do. The ride back to Henderson's Market felt longer than any I had ever taken. Every turn of the pedals was heavy with the weight of my decision. I was filled with a sense of grim purpose, a cold, hard conviction that I was doing something necessary and important. I was choosing principle over personal feeling, and it made me feel mature, responsible. I walked into the store, which was quiet for once. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, tidying up. I approached him, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a strange sense of righteousness. I told him my story. I explained that I knew who had taken the unicorn beanie baby. I described seeing Michael with it in the park. I focused on the facts as I knew them, presenting my case with the gravity I felt it deserved. I was the bearer of a difficult truth, and I felt the importance of that role. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. He didn't praise me or thank me in the way I might have expected. He just looked tired. But in my 12-year-old mind, I had done it. I had upheld the law of our small universe. I had done the right thing. I didn't see the confrontation. I didn't want to. I left the store and went straight home, my part in the drama complete. The consequences, however, became apparent the very next day. I saw Michael from a distance, leaving the store. Mr. Henderson wasn't with him. He was alone, and the way he walked was different. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite name. His shoulders were slumped, and he didn't look up as he walked. He saw me standing with my bike across the street, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was no anger in his expression, just a flat, empty look of acknowledgement before he turned away. That was the last time he ever looked directly at me. For the rest of the summer, he and his friends were a ghost presence. They still came to the store, but they kept their distance. The easy magic of our days was broken. The curb, where we had talked, was just a piece of concrete again. The air between us was thick with what I had done, and the summer that had felt so full of promise just weeks before now felt tainted and sad. Near the end of August, a moving truck appeared in front of Michael's house. His family was leaving. The news rippled through the neighborhood, another piece of the summer's story. I watched from my window as they loaded boxes and furniture. I never saw him to say goodbye. I never had the chance, and I wasn't sure what I would have said anyway. He was gone, and with his departure, the story of that summer began to set in my mind. Over the years, the memory calcified, the nuances eroded, worn smooth by time and retelling. It became a simple parable. A boy had stolen something, and I had told the truth. My crush, our conversations, the complexity of the situation, all of it faded into the background. What remained was the lesson. Honesty is the best policy. Doing the right thing is more important than being liked. It was a neat, tidy conclusion that I carried with me into adulthood, a foundational story that proved my own inherent goodness. I never had a reason to question it. And now, I sit here, a woman in her late 30s, the solid ground of my own history turned to quicksand beneath me. The social media post is still open on my screen, a digital ghost from a past I thought I understood. My adult mind grapples with the actions of my childhood self, and I feel a profound sense of shame. It wasn't just that I was wrong about the why of his actions, it was my complete and utter lack of curiosity. It never once occurred to my 12-year-old self to ask him. It never occurred to me that there might be a story behind the story, a reason that had nothing to do with the simple binary of good and bad. I saw a fact, the unicorn in his hands, and I built an entire narrative around it, a narrative that cast me as the hero. The weight of this new truth is immense. I wasn't a hero. I was a child who, in her own self-righteous certainty, added another burden to a family that was already struggling. My right thing was a cruel and unnecessary blow. The empathy I pride myself on as an adult was nowhere to be found in the girl I was that summer. For days, I debated what to do. The urge to find Michael, to explain, to apologize, was overwhelming. But what would that accomplish? It felt self-serving, a way to alleviate my own guilt rather than offer any real comfort to him. The past was past, but I couldn't just do nothing. Finally, I decided on a different course. I would write to his sister Jessica, the author of the post. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I composed the message, rewriting it a dozen times. I kept it brief. I introduced myself, explaining that I was a girl from the old neighborhood, that I had been at Henderson's Market that summer. I told her that I had just read her beautiful tribute to her father and had only now, after 25 years, learned the context of their family's situation that year. I didn't make excuses or try to justify my actions. I simply said that I was the one who told Mr. Henderson about the Beanie Baby, and that I was profoundly sorry for the pain my actions had caused her brother and her family. I finished by saying that I hoped Michael was happy and doing well. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The waiting was agonizing. I checked my messages constantly, my stomach twisting with a mixture of hope and dread. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe she wouldn't reply at all. Maybe she would reply with anger. And honestly, I wouldn't have blamed her. A week went by. I had almost given up, resigning myself to the fact that my message would remain a one-sided confession sent out into the void. Then, one evening, a notification appeared. It wasn't from Jessica. The message was from Michael. It was short, only a few sentences. He wrote that his sister had forwarded him my message. He said thank you for my words. He said he remembered that summer, and he remembered me. He told me not to worry about it, that we were just kids. He ended it by saying he hoped I was well too. Reading his message, I didn't feel the sudden, clean relief of absolution. That wasn't what this was about. Instead, a quiet, peaceful sense of closure settled over me. It was the grace of understanding, extended across a quarter of a century. The story of that summer was finally complete. Its harsh lines softened, its simple lesson replaced by a more complex and human truth. The unforgettable feeling of that 90s summer was no longer about a bike and a corner store. It was about the quiet acknowledgement that we are all just doing the best we can with the story we have at the time.